Now back to the dire situation in Japan, as we've been reporting. Japanese officials said to be discussing a possible last resort.
This is the most severe earthquake that they have ever had.
2 workers at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan have been taken to hospital after being exposed to high levels of radiation.
Japan says operations of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant have been suspended.
Highly radioactive water has been detected outside the turbine building for reactor number 2 of the troubled Fukushima Daiichi plant.
About 45 tons of radioactive water has reportedly leaked out of the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan.
Thanks for joining us on the program. Today we're going to be talking about Fukushima and the nuclear meltdown that occurred a couple years ago. Joining me today are 2 distinguished scholars, Andrew Desloover and Ben Workman. Great to have you guys today.
It's good to be here, Ben.
Thank you for having us. So just to get our viewers kind of up to date on what Fukushima means and what happened, on March 11th, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake resulted in a tsunami which slammed into the Fukushima nuclear power plant in northeast Japan. Obviously, a very detrimental impact on Japan and its people. How dangerous for your health would you say the radiation leaking from Fukushima is for people's health?
Well, Brent, there are 80,000 gallons of radioactive water flowing into the sea every day. Being that the Japanese people have a mainly seafood diet, consuming the fish and, say, seaweed that is radioactive can be detrimental to their health in the long term.
While I do agree with a lot of what Andrew had to say, I do believe a lot of the health effects have been blown out of proportion at this point in time. We are susceptible to various radioactive chemicals every day from soil and water through atmospheric fallout. And the general consensus at this point in time from experts in this field is that the biggest health effect towards people is the seafood that is in this contaminated water. And they are taking precautions to remove the seafood from the water, so if people aren't eating this, they won't be seeing these adverse effects.
Now, what's been gaining a lot of traction in the news lately is Japan has begun the long, laborious process of fuel rod removal. Is this something that at this point in time you feel is either worthwhile or advisable for the people of Japan?
I don't believe it's either worthwhile or advisable at this point in time, Brent, because the fuel rods are submerged in this radioactive material, and it'll be very hard for these workers to work in that environment. And when you have head engineers heading up this decomposing process, saying that all they can do is hope and pray, if they're not confident in the work that they're doing, this isn't something that they should take on at this point in time.
And I agree with Ben. The removal process does need to happen, but like you said, the fuel rods are submerged underwater right now, and part of the 80,000 gallons that are leaking a day are from these tanks that are holding the fuel rods. So the water needs to go down in order to remove the fuel rods in a safer manner. And being that they're still underwater, I don't think that it's very safe right now, but as the water resides, they should definitely be removed as safely as possible.
So going off of the fuel rod removal, Japan is actually looking to begin the process of removing nuclear energy entirely from its policies and standpoints. How do you feel about this at this point in time? Is this something Japan should be looking to do short term, long term perhaps?
Well, Brent, after the disaster back in March of 2011, Japan has closed down all 50 of their nuclear plants, and nuclear power consisted of 1/3 of their energy output. Now, there needs to be something to replace nuclear power, and I think wind energy and solar energy is a good fit for right now.
I do agree with a lot of what Andrew said, although I do believe this should be brought forth in the long term. Due to the implementation costs, it's going to cost a lot to build these windmills and build the structures for solar energy. And it's also going to be difficult to transfer the expertise of the workers that are familiar with nuclear power and train them in terms of sustainable energy.
That's a good point. Obviously, there's a lot of pros and cons that go along with that. Obviously, renewable energy long term can mean free, but in the short term, there's a lot of upfront costs with it. And of course, people who might have been employed in nuclear power plants might not find the same work that they do now. So obviously, a big economic decision. I read somewhere it would cost approximately $100 billion to put up windmills throughout Germany, so this is obviously not a cheap endeavor. Thank you guys for being here. I got one last question for you. Seeing all over the news, you see Fukushima, nuclear meltdown, it gets equated with Chernobyl almost immediately. Are these two really that comparable in your eyes?
I don't believe that these two are comparable at this point in time. Due to Chernobyl taking place 27 years ago, and 3 months after that effect, there were 300 counts of radioactive sickness and 30 deaths. And with Fukushima from 2011 until now, there really hasn't been a way for you to quantify where these deaths are taking place or how they've come about.
In the long term, Fukushima could potentially be compared to Chernobyl because in Ukraine, the consumption of radioactive animals and crops over the years is what gave cancer to the people of Ukraine. And with Japan, there's 80,000 gallons a day of radioactive water leaking into essentially their food supply, being that they're mainly a seafood consumption. The long-term effects of them eating the seafood could be detrimental to their health, and who knows, we could see more radioactive health issues come up in the future.
Very good, yeah. Obviously with Chernobyl, 27 years, it's very easy to sort of pinpoint and identify radioactive material and where it went wrong. And perhaps it just hasn't been quite long enough with Fukushima. Only time will tell. Thank you again for joining us on the program.
Shed light, yeah.